This is what I did last night. After I got home, I drank 6 more glasses of whiskey, and then I finished crafting this small harp, using a bandsaw, a spoke shave, and an oscillating spindle sander.
Oh man, would I love to see the tools in Ron's shop. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. Today we're not going to be building a harp, but we are going to be talking about the tools you need to start woodworking. Turns out it's not as many tools as you think. So if you saw my video from last week, you'll know that I built this beautiful tilted leg table with just some simple tools in my garage. And the reason that I did this is because my shop is being renovated. In fact, if you listen really closely, you can hear the saws right now. And since I was going crazy not being able to build anything, I pulled up only the tools that I needed in order to build that table. And this got me thinking, since I only pulled up the tools that I needed, I have the most stripped down wood shop that I've ever had since I first started woodworking. So I thought this would be an excellent opportunity to take a look at all the tools I pulled up and talk about what I think are essential tools for woodworking. So let's get started and take a look at these basic tools. So the first item we're going to take a look at is something that most of us don't even consider a woodworking tool. However, for the modern woodworker, I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And the first item is the computer. Now you've heard me talk about Googling deep to find those unique tools. However, I also Google deep when I get into a tricky situation with my project. In this modern age, we're extremely fortunate to be able to use this unique resource to help us with new techniques that we may not have tried before.
I found this typewriter next to the courtyard dumpster, took her home, polished her up, and bought a brand new ribbon off of electronicbay.com.
In fact, being the woodworking apprentice that I am, I would say that I've learned more off of Google and YouTube searches than any other resource. And that's why I think it's important to have this library of information at your fingertips in your shop.
Me want a book.
All right.
And 1 box of cookies, please.
So now that we have this library at our fingertips, let's talk about the second item, which I think is essential for project builds. And this is the first thing that I brought up before any tools, a flat, reliable tabletop. And no, you don't need a festool MFT. In fact, if I were to do it all over again, I'm not even sure I would purchase an MFT. But you do need a flat surface, both for assembling your projects as well as having a home for your tools. In fact, this folding table was the backbone of my shop for many years. And if you're able to, having 2 flat surfaces is great. One for assembling your projects and one as a home base for your tools. Now that we have a couple of flat surfaces, we can begin to start talking about the only 2 major tools that I brought up for this project. So the first major tool is one that probably doesn't surprise any of you, and that's the job site table saw. And the table saw obviously doesn't need to be a dewalt table saw. This is one that I selected and used as my main table saw for years, and the mobility of this table saw is one of the reasons why I purchased it. The table saw is going to primarily allow you to do rip cuts, but you can do miter cuts, cross cuts, and some other techniques. But there are some limitations with the table saw, especially when you get into cross cutting and miter cutting. And I encountered these problems when I was building that table, as even with a crosscut sled, I was unable to make the cuts I needed because of my table saw's capacity. And my table saw even has a pretty hefty capacity at about 33 inches. And this is where we need to start talking about our second major tool, not only to help us with our cross cuts, but also our miter cuts. And it should be as no surprise, the second major tool that I brought up is the miter saw.
Hey Dad, we're all out of toilet paper.
I can fix it.
Not only does the miter saw give you unlimited crosscut capacity, but it also gives you a wide range of miter cuts that you can create, in my case 60 degrees on one side and 50 degrees on the other, so that you can cut perfect miters at unlimited capacity with ease. And when I was building this table, that was important to me because I had to make 36-degree cuts. And many people may think that having a miter saw is a luxury that's not needed. However, for the modern shop, I think it's a luxury that's become an essential. So now that we have a computer, a couple of flat surfaces, a table saw, and a miter saw, let's talk about some of the smaller tools that I brought up. So the first smaller tools that I brought up are the drill and driver. And you'll notice with the brand of this drill and driver, these are 2 of the cheapest drill and drivers that you can purchase. These are made by Ryobi. And before you leave a comment, I know it's pronounced ryobi.
Are you alright? Yeah. It's really hot.
Yeah. You good?
Do you need a garbage can or?
But regardless, I've had this drill and driver set since I first started woodworking, and these two tools have worked strong for over 10 years. And because of YouTube, I've upgraded to dewalt and then festool, but I'm here to tell you those ryobis get the job done. But no matter what brand you go with, you're gonna need a drill and driver set. Now, if you're like me, when you first start out, you may think you only need a drill, as you can drive screws with a drill. But once you upgrade to an impact driver, you'll never go back. And it's these two tools that are essential for things like pilot holes and joinery. In order to use that drill and driver, you're going to need some bits. Let's take a look at the bits that I think are a good baseline for any beginning shop. So these are all the bits that I brought up from my shop. As you can see, there's some standard drill bits as well as some Forstner bits. You'll also notice some countersink bits, and finally for the impact driver, I have some star bits, which is my preferred screw, as well as a Phillips head. And honestly, those bits should get you through about 95% of your projects. And the nice thing about bits is they typically come in combination packaging, so you should get every size you need. Well, that's enough about the drill and driver. Now let's move on to the next handheld tool I brought up for my stripped down shop. And this is one tool that I wish I would have bought earlier in my woodworking career. And this tool is the palm router. There's no other router in my shop that I use more than this dewalt palm router. And for a small shop that doesn't have a router table, a palm router gives you the flexibility you need to do almost anything you can do with a full-size router. It's perfect for chamfers, roundovers, and many of the edge profiles that you need with your projects. And just like with that drill and driver set, I've had experience with a lot of different brands, from dewalt to ryobi to Bosch to festool. And out of all those brands, I keep coming back to this dewalt palm router. Now, one thing that I do think is important with a palm router is to get a corded version. This makes sure that you don't run out of power or you're underpowered.
Mr. Griffin, would you like to cut the cord?
Sure.
Okay, that wasn't the cord, and now you've got a girl.
Now, just like with the drill and driver set, you're gonna need some bits for that router. And I suggest starting off with two different types of bits, a roundover set as well as a chamfer set. And if money's burning a hole in your pocket, the last bit that I would get is a flush trim bit. Since we have a drill and driver set as well as a palm router, there's one more handheld power tool that I think is essential for any shop. And this is a tool that I guarantee you spend more time with than any other tool in your shop, whether you like it or not. And this tool is the 5-inch orbital sander. And once again, for my table project, I brought up my old reliable ryobi. And once again, this gets the job done. And I've spent more time behind that 5-inch ryobi than any other tool that I own. And I've got a dewalt as well as a festool 5-inch sander. And all sanders these days are pretty reasonably priced, except for festool. And many of the sanders these days come in cordless versions. However, for the same reasons I recommended a corded version of the palm router, I also recommended a corded version for the sander. In order to use this sander, however, you are going to need some consumables, and that of course is sandpaper. And if you're just starting out, you may go to the big box store and be confused by all the different grits of sandpaper. But there's sort of a hard and fast rule for using sandpaper. You never want to go up more than 50% of your last grit used. And the lowest grit that I typically start with is 80. So I'll go from 80 to 120 to 180 if I can find it. And it's this reason that I recommend having these 3 grits of sandpapers on hand at all times. But the orbital sander is unfortunately not the only sander you're going to need, as I'm a firm believer that all your final sanding should be done by hand.
Doing some hand sanding.
And that's why I of course brought up my sanding mouse. These are great because they take the same sandpaper that your orbital sander does and allow you to get into those tight spots. And I'm guessing most of you already have a sanding mouse, but if you don't, I'll leave a link in the description below along with the other tools we've taken a look at so that you can go check it out for yourself. So now that I've talked about all the power tools you'll need for a stripped down shop and begun to talk about some of the hand powered tools you need, let's move on to our next item. So measuring and precision is an essential part of woodworking, and because of this, we're going to need some tools to help us out. First and foremost, you're going to need a tape measure. And whether you're working in imperial or metric, you just want to make sure that your tape measure blade has the increments that will work for you. And my go-to tape measure for the last 3 years has been the lefty-righty made by FastCap. However, any tape measure will do as long as it works for you. But that's not the only measuring device that I brought up from my shop, as I also needed a tool that would tell me what was exactly square, as well as a tool that would allow me to scribe lines. And these are the tools that I brought up, and I definitely didn't need all these tools, I just grabbed a handful. However, these tools are probably a little bit of overkill for what I was doing. A Swanson Speed Square would have done the trick in this project. But out of all the squares I've purchased over the last few years, the one that I've been the most impressive is this 12-inch Woodwork Precision Square. This has scribe lines running every 1/16 of an inch, running down the entire length of the square. It also has a lip to support itself as you're scribing your lines or measuring for square. And maybe even a better option for me may have been to bring up a combination square. However, my combination square is inaccessible. So whether you're using a Swanson, a Woodpecker's, or a Woodwork, just make sure that you have something in your shop where you can scribe lines and measure for square. So the next essential tool that I brought up for my table project is one that you'll be collecting for the rest of your woodworking career. And that's because, as they say, you can never have enough of these. And you guessed it, it's clamps. These obviously come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, from quick clamps to F-style clamps to screw clamps, but there is one recommendation I have for the beginning woodworker. Buy the longest clamp that you can afford. Since all clamps can cinch down to nothing, having a longer clamp gives you that much more flexibility. And a great cheaper solution for a basic shop is to buy pipe clamps. These are completely customizable by the size of pipe that you buy, and you can extend them as long as you want with some couplers. Just be aware that you'll have a future project where you'll eventually run out of clamps. Well, we've just about covered all the tools that I brought up for my temporary shop. Now there is one tool that I also think is a necessity, however many of you may not agree with me. The problem is I find myself reaching for this tool more and more often. And that tool is the simple flush trim saw. Now this isn't my preferred flush trim saw, however it is what I was able to grab from my old shop. And the reason I'm recommending a flush trim saw is when I was first starting out, most of my joinery was done with dowels. And this is the perfect tool for removing the end of those dowels. And this saw is just a cheap one from Harbor Freight. However, these saws have become quite affordable over the years. In fact, I really like this one and I've used it for a couple of years, and this is quite affordable on Amazon.com. Well, we're now getting really close to having a usable woodworking shop where we can make almost anything. Let's take a look at one of our last items. One of the last tools that I brought up was the good old-fashioned trusty hammer. Now this may not have been my first choice for a woodworking hammer, however, it's what I could grab. Now if I were to pick a hammer that would be perfect for a woodworking shop, it would be one of these double-sided hammers that has a hard side and a soft side. Hammers like that are perfect for coercing your wood together when you're trying to make that perfect joint. And even though I didn't have access to that hammer, I still got the job done perfectly with a good old-fashioned wooden hammer. Well, that just about covers all the tools you'll need to make almost any project that you want. There are a couple of other items that I did want to mention, however. And the first item is an obvious one, and that's a good writing utensil. I tend to migrate towards a mechanical pencil as this gives me the precision that I need.
Oh my god, I finally got picked up. Oh my god, I never thought this day would come. Oh my god, who's that?
And lastly, it's some PPE. A good dust mask as well as some protective eyewear is an essential for any shop. Not only that, but it's also important to protect our ears. Now, I was in a rock band throughout college, so my hearing is pretty much shot, but I do need to invest in some earplugs. Well, that's literally it. I was able to build this table with all the tools we talked about and no other tools. Was that a lot of tools? Well, sort of. However, most of these tools are inexpensive from a woodworker's perspective. I would guess you could get all the tools that we talked about today for under $1,000 or even cheaper if you bought them used. Now, all this is great. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of tools that I really missed when building this table. First and foremost is dust collection. I didn't bring any dust collection tools to my temporary shop, and if I didn't have a mask, this whole project would have been miserable, let alone extremely dangerous for my lungs. The second thing that I missed was my router table. Although the palm router did a wonderful job, I missed the ability to make micro adjustments with my router at the router table. The third thing that I missed was my drill press. I had to make a lot of perpendicular holes for that table, and it would have been nice to have the drill press assist. And the last thing that I missed was a large assembly table. The MFT barely cut it, and if I had a bigger assembly table, this project would have been a heck of a lot easier. Well, this table project that I built in my garage really gave me a well-needed perspective on tools. And that's that you don't need the most expensive or highest quality tool to get quality work out of your wood shop. You just need practice and time, and you'll be proud of any project you build with any tool. Well, thanks for joining me today on going through what I consider essential tools to get out in the shop and build something. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.